Welcome, everybody. My name is Mark Billings. I'm a managing director with CFGI. I lead their healthcare practice, which is primarily quality of earnings and financial due diligence work, but other areas of CFGI do everything that the CFO role can do. We're a financial and accounting advisory firm who will do the buy-side, sell-side due diligence work, valuation, interim management if needed, and then work with you for the more technical accounting issues, and then as well all through the end, the exit planning that you may need. I have for the executive panel an esteemed group of people who you will have heard a number of different themes being discussed in the past couple of panels, where my view here is that these panelists will give you that view from what you might call the cold face, the anecdotes of real life, and not necessarily the theory. So I will let firstly each panelist, going from right to left, Mark, just introduce themselves a little bit, and then just talk as a two-part question, what you see innovation is, just to introduce the topic. So one of the key drivers of healthcare and the consolidation which is going on isn't just the demographic changes we talked about. It's also a lot of disruption being caused from new entrants coming to the market, changes which was alluded to before of payment structures going from the reimbursement based upon the amount of treatments being provided by a physician to the value to population health management. So there's a big sense in the market, and I'm not sure if anyone has attended the JP Morgan conference or anything like that recently, that there's a tipping point when it comes to some of this change and innovation. And some of the big themes of that is tech, but then others is the consumer focus of healthcare and a number of other different factors which from an operational view, as you look at deals in the sector, you're going to start hitting up against more and more. So Mark, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and talking about how you've seen innovation impact and drive M&A in the healthcare sector. Terrific.
It's a pleasure to be here. Mark Dewey. I formed a company called Prometrics a little over 2 decades ago, focusing on the data collection process and helping provide decision support. Prometrics stands for professional measurement. Always being, when I did my MBA, I knew I wasn't the smartest guy, and so there's always smarter folks and gals. And so what I decided to do was look at footsteps of physicians and other caretakers and decide which paths were better than others. And spent the first maybe 6-7 years, the 7-year ditch, we have to change it once in a while, but the first 7 years looking at physician prescribing as a transactional dimension to support pharmaceutical companies' decisions for investing and looking into new areas. Then for another 7 years into what's called product movement, from the factory, where does this product go to get to the pharmacy or the doctor's clinic or the hospital? In the last 7 years, we've been looking at specifically patient-level data, and that's where you'll see a lot of innovation, creating a lot of opportunity and a lot of transactions in M&A in healthcare, in particular, pharmaceutical, biotech, and clinical services for CROs and clinical research organizations. And the reason for that is that, and I want to make a little distinction between innovation and invention. So we hear a lot about invention and ideas. M&A doesn't follow that. M&A follows innovation. What I mean by that is practical, documented advantage in the marketplace. Today, we have the ability to look at the fastest moving areas like specialty pharmacy, where while most of you might not even know what specialty pharmacy is, it's actually only 1% of the volume of all prescribing, but about 33% of the dollar volume and 52% of the profit. And if you look at the pipelines of the industry, over 80% of everything that's in front of the FDA today is in specialty medicine. and the margins are very high, and the markets are getting smaller and smaller because of precision medicine. And so the ability to innovate around unmet needs or gaps in the marketplace, as documented by data that takes patient-level identified data and connecting it into claims streams, connecting it into electronic medical record streams, and connecting it into now more recently genomic streams from companies like Caris or Genomics, Foundation Health. So now you know the genomic instability, the care paths taken, and those that are successful and not successful. Remember, I'm not very smart. I'm just looking at what other people have done and which ones are better or worse for the client, the pharmaceutical company. That's worked out quite well, and 2 years ago we sold the firm to the private equity, and now I'm using this gap analysis to fund biotech companies so that the other clients of ours can buy them someday. That's my
Hi there, I'm Wendy DeSico. I have spent 25 years in the life sciences industry as an executive, president, chief operating officer, chief financial officer, growing companies from concept through to commercialization. I now function as a board and executive advisor to those same companies. I also serve on the boards of directors of Carmel Therapeutics and iPoint Pharmaceuticals, and as an advisor to Pact Pharmaceuticals, so companies in the orthopedic, ophthalmology, and immunotherapy spaces. To me, innovation is anything that drives product change or service change in your market, whatever that may be, to the next level. And from an M&A perspective, I think companies, every day their strategy includes how do we get to the next level? How do we bring our thoughts and our processes to market? And when they don't have all things they need to do that, whether that be the intellectual property, the process, or a piece of that technology, they either merge or acquire new data sets or process sets to make that the full complement to bring something to market. So that's how I think it drives the merger M&A.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Chitra Durai, not a physician doctor, but doctor of science. So I'm an AI scientist by training, 30 years of extensive experience in data science, machine learning, and AI. I was at IBM until last year. I was a former IBM fellow. I'm the first Indian woman in the globe to have been ever appointed as an IBM fellow. There are only few of us in the world nominated as appointed as an IBM fellow. Many of them have gone on to win Nobel Prizes and Turing Award. I stepped outside of IBM last year as I was serving the CTO of AI for IBM Global Business Services to put my passion to work, which is founding the company called Amicus Brain Innovations, which is what I had alluded to. Amicus Brain is defining the future for the world's older population at the confluence of two trends I talked about: the exploding numbers of the older people, not only in the US, but across the world, as well as the trend of 90% of Americans hate being put away in assisted care facilities or long-term care, which was alluded to. So therefore, there's going to be, as wallet-rich baby boomers age, there is going to be an explosion of interest in the home healthcare agencies. And Amicus Brain is working with home healthcare agencies to transform their operations. So we have built a AI-based decision support platform to provide advice for making the optimal decisions in your golden years, to coaching for caregiving for the older people, to digital companion, all of these powered by machine learning and AI. And market wanted us to talk about this invention and innovation. As you can, if you look me up, hundreds of papers in peer-reviewed academic conferences and journals, and inventor of 48 patents. So invention obviously is coming up with a new idea that has never been discovered before. And typically invention happens with a strong technical or scientific background. But many of you are innovators, because innovation is about taking an idea and making it into a concrete reality. So it could be improving an existing process or product with another idea which already existed or to be invented. So for me, innovation makes a real difference in businesses and people's lives. In healthcare, I look at it as the merger between CVS Health and Aetna, between two non-providers, is really a very innovative merger. I mean, it is shaking if you think deeply about it, it is shaking the whole healthcare, consumer healthcare landscape, because underneath the merger is a deep strategy of exploiting the data that Aetna has, and therefore being able to drive the consumers away from the hospitals and the primary care physicians into CVS's retail clinics, and that's brilliant. And likewise, you can imagine the pay on the other side. CVS can now use its, patients who are coming in to get medicine from CVS. So it's a win-win. I know the industry objected vehemently to the merger, but as merger has gone on, I call that as an example of innovation. While fundamentally there was no scientific advance, but it is shaking out the whole landscape of healthcare, putting pressure on traditional providers such as hospitals and primary care physicians.
Good afternoon all, thank you for attending. My name is Harris Apiz. I'm a managing director and partner at Advanced Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation, long for Advanced PMR. My background is in management, consulting, and in technology. I had the privilege of joining Advanced PMR 5 years ago. We are a multi-specialty outpatient rehabilitation facility. Again, we offer physical therapy, acupuncture, medical supplies, pain management, and orthopedics. With me coming on board, my partner and I expanded Advanced PMR throughout New Jersey to now 7 sites. Last year, we were strategically acquired by private equity, where we retained close to a third in ownership, and my focus has truly been on M&A activity and growing and in scaling the Advanced PMR brand across the tri-state area and hopefully nationally. What I've seen as a big form of innovation within my space in particular has truly been the evolution of viewing patients as consumers, and with that, focusing emphasis on building a brand rather than a patient asking for a specific doctor. And with that model in mind, we have experienced exponential growth, double digits every year since 2015.
Thank you, Harris. So a number of the panelists, you noticed, talked about data. So when it comes to innovation in healthcare, one of the larger themes, in addition to some of the other tools which have been created to disrupt the market, is this huge explosion we've been seeing for the amount of data. So it's been seen on in the biotech area and development, but it's also been seen on the health services side. So starting with you, Mark, if you can talk a little bit about big data, maybe educate the audience, if they're not familiar, of what the scale of that opportunity has been, and some of the best practices you've seen in your work at Prometrics of the best practices that clients and their use of data have shown.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of data available. So in our shop, we have 300 million American lives in the bowels of the organization, with data coming in sometimes weekly, sometimes daily. But I think that there's a bit of a misnomer, I don't know if you agree with this or not, Shrika, that big data is not all that terribly important and all that particularly useful. When it is used to develop and add to truth tables, when you have, let's say, 10,000 patients or something like 5,000 patients, each with $50,000 a month, kind of thing, that's very valuable. And adding on to their journey, the patient journey. Typically, what we're trying to do, of course, is deliver ease when there's some disease, right? And that starts with a patient journey. And many companies say that they're patient-centric. Innovation is going to permit us to become truly patient-centric. Because today we actually consider the journey to start when a caregiver sees a patient. It starts. And of course, sometimes you lose them to care of some kind. Today, that journey, which may be a 1-month journey to an 18-month journey, we need to add on previously what happened. Where did this patient come from? Where have they been? What have they consumed already? And then also prospectively going forward, even after you lost the patient, the particular caregiver, pharmaceutical companies in particular are interested in carrying that patient forward. with patient engagement, two-way texting, for example. What the CEO of CVS indicated that the main reason for the merger was to facilitate patient engagements. One particular example of a peer-reviewed journal article that looked at patient-reported, we call it PRO, patient-reported outcomes. The ability of just talking to a patient digitally, typically, as cheaply as possible, because making the phone calls is very, over time it's expensive when you scale. Doing it digitally, we've seen that in lung cancer, for example, just talking to the patient digitally increases progression-free survival by 4.5 months. So here we are killing ourselves with hundreds of millions of dollars of investments in small molecule inhibitors, but kinase inhibitors, and here we go, a little old texting back and forth lets people live 4.5 months longer.
And that's something which comes out from the data analysis.
Correct. So maybe another quick little example would be this, is that small data is much more important than big data, but big data allows you to add to your small table to create a more robust truth table, which is needed to be able to run your algorithms. Machine learning algorithms, whether it be support vector or random forest, these little, just think of Excel, just putting some data into something and it comes out. You're able to understand very non-intuitive components of patient care. A good example is that there are many companies right now in immuno-oncology. It's a massively growing area. 1,000 companies, over 2,000 trials at the FDA. When there's really two companies, that are the two Goliaths right now battling it out, with Keytruda at Merck and Optivo over at BMS. Keytruda is a $10 billion. You'll hear about it and saw the numbers last week. So it'll be in the paper here, Wall Street Journal, in a couple of days or so. It's a $10 billion franchise. And Optivo is a $3 billion franchise. The molecules are essentially the same. So you get into why is one different than the other. And it turns out that Merck is much more efficacious or forward thinking in how they accept the patient. They're actually more restrictive. BMS, the faster moving, more hungry, allows all the other kinds of patients to come in. It turns out they have much more significant adverse events than Merck does. Particularly corticosteroid treatment in the prior 5 years prior to oncology treatment, almost certainly with advanced analytics shows that predictably that patients are going to have these cardiovascular events. In fact, with our AR program that we put together, we can tell not only that they're going to have a cardiac event, cardiology. We can actually tell when we look at the lab data, which then you throw in, specific to the patient again. So you don't need big data, you need specific to that patient, that you'll be able to predict within 65 to 85 days that the patient will have about an only 9% probability of successful prediction, 9 out of 10 times correct, an infarct of some kind. And that's obviously something you want to know. But I think what people may not understand is that typically you have a clinical trial. The clinical trial gives you permission to go to market. It has performance characteristics that are completely irrelevant to the marketplace and innovation. It's very important. 82% of all patients on oncology drugs today would fail and would never be permitted to get into the clinical trial to start with. And so synthetic control arms become very important and an important area of innovation. And also the concept of sitting down and understanding that the patient, as they emerge onto various products, they're typically on polypharmacy. And so there is no clinical trial component. But what's interesting is that this real world data available from all of us, all these people walking in this room. Okay, if we got 300 million Americans, guess what? The probability is about 8 or 0.7 that we've got you somewhere in our data set. And it's your data that's playing a role in the real world evidence. And now that companies know, like Merck knows that BMS has got their data, BMS knows that Merck got their data, the sales reps are now battling it out in the health economics area. And those analytics form in themselves and by themselves an important innovation.
Great, thank you. Wendy, I think you've seen in your roles data being used more like marketing and direct to consumer view. What anecdotes can you share?
I think certainly the adoption of electronic medical records at hospitals and in physician practices has made the availability of data, IMS data for example, to businesses as they evaluate opportunities, markets, the size of a market, where they want to go with their product. the prevalence of data in any market segment that you want to look at is overwhelming. And the way that you can slice it and dice it, market reports are available down to a subsegment of a subsegment of a subsegment of a subsegment. So you can really hone in on the opportunity that you'd like to address because of the prevalence of electronic medical records that are being used throughout medicine today. That being said, they're also now stressing value-based medicine, and when you're making these decisions about what avenues to pursue, whether it be pharmaceuticals or products, medical devices, all of this information is being used at the same time by hospital systems, by GPO, group purchasing organizations to negotiate better with every company on the market about how they want to buy things for less. And so as a company, you're forced or encouraged to figure out how to come to market at a more effective price because you're being pushed down by all of these administrative organizations to do it at a better price. So it's also forcing companies to think about things more effectively.
Does adding value through efficiency and that competition?
For sure. For sure.
Transparency.
For transparency.
Yeah. So, Chitra, as an AI expert, as data is being used and it's expanded both from the clinical research side for pharma, from the use of efficiency in the healthcare universe, how have you seen that additional level of innovation of artificial intelligence in the business, in healthcare?
Data has always existed in these organizations, whether you're a payer or a provider or a long-term care, home healthcare agency. I think what has changed is that the barrier has been lowered in terms of technology to harness this data and turn it into insights, behavioral, patient-centric insights. So when Mark talked about small data, big data, I look at it as the use of big data comes in expanding and developing an end-to-end insight about a certain behavior. So it's not just you're looking at, when we talk about small data, it's typically numbers. And the numbers tend to, when you run any kind of analytical model, you tend to get correlations more than causality. Whereas when you start expanding that small data to big data, namely doctor notes and diagnostic notes and pictures and so on, what has happened is you've really expanded the data universe about the person, and you can bring in new kind of analysis to expand, to go from merely being a correlative recommendation to more confident causality-induced recommendation. So that's the power big data brings, and AI in particular provides technology to translate those notes, which is written in English in the US, in different languages in other parts of the world, into either numbers or qualitative information that can be fed into your predictive models. For example, before this, I'll tell you a very an example that touched most of the people in the United States. During the 2008 economic crisis, the housing market exploded, and 9 to 11 million people were under the risk of foreclosure. They were 3 months delinquent, and they were going to be evicted by banks. That was the scenario of the US homeowner. So people had done predictive models, understanding who is at risk of defaulting. But what it did not tell the story was that there were people who had children in the community, this is where they grew up, and they needed help in terms of retaining their home. Whereas some people got way over their heads during the housing bubble, and for them, if the bank took the home away, it was not such a hardship. So how do you differentiate that? The numbers don't tell the story. So I was involved with a very large client in the US who held up close to $6 trillion of housing portfolio. And I brought AI and used big data. That means recognizing what these delinquent borrowers were talking on the phone and understanding what the call center agents were taking them as notes representing the situation of these delinquent borrowers. Using that, we could actually understand what right resolution that needs to be provided for these homeowners to walk away with head held high, dignity, so that they don't have the stigma of being closed on. So that kind of insights you would have never have found in any kind of data. I challenge anyone, because numbers tell only a slice of human behavior. You need to have other data. That's why pictures of us, mammograms and MRIs, augment that data. We call it big data, and therefore analysis using AI techniques essentially flesh out our insights to give us the power to change the behavior of people.
Thank you. So just narrowing the focus then on, we've heard a lot about the kind of big data and a lot of large organizations. Harris, if you're able to share how, if any of these insights and analytics tools are being used in how you run your practices at this stage, or is there anything which piques your interest of, hey, we need to get that?
Sure.
We're in that kind of lower middle market space.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I mean, most small owner-operator physician practices, anyone that we're really targeting between $1 million to $5 million EBITDA, 3 to 5 sites, they generally don't have a lot of data. What really helped my company be marketable to outside investors was the advent of data for our specific model. How are patients finding us? How are patients being cross-referred for our internal services? How are we billing? How are we monetizing? What is our retention rate? And what is the performance ratio for each individual employee? And what can we do? What processes can we put in place to make sure that employees are working at peak capacity while also maintaining what I call a experience that's unprecedented in the healthcare space? We've really truly created a model where I want patients to come in and feel as if they're a consumer. So we want the experience to be phenomenal from the moment that the front desk receptionist picks up the phone to the moment that the patient's discharged. All the data that's comprised in between the process of how that happened is vital to us being able to grow. We really started compiling data within my practice right around 2015. We started implementing that in 2016, and we experienced almost 100% growth going from 2017 to 2018, which really made us very marketable to the outside investment world. And the utilization of data, especially big data, when it comes to being able to look at your payer mix, where your patients are coming from, combined with how you're going to scale and grow this model, is a missing link in most of the M&A activity that I've seen in the small to middle market that's happening in the tri-state area. And us being able to implement data to then scale our model, combined with making sure that the margins are moving up incrementally, has been a vital tool in ensuring our continued success.
Another quick comment.
Yeah.
That might be helpful. Is that there's this tendency for people to think that data is data. In other words, you got to collect it and put it in front of you. Whereas the kinds of things that IBM is doing and other companies are doing create significant value. And when done at smaller companies, they have to get merged and acquired. And 2 quick examples of where's the Flatiron building? It's not too far from here, right? Flatiron District. There's a company called Flatiron in our space that was acquired by Roche. And when I say, $1.8 billion, it must have been a big company with a lot of stuff, right? Well, it's 2 guys, I'm a professor, and these 2 guys from Wharton, head over to the West Coast and work a little bit at Google. And they come back and want to raise some money, so they talk to some PE folks, and they raise some money and they acquire a fairly, small, medium-sized EMR company. And they start applying a little bit of AI to it. And Roche says, I can't allow my competitors to have this really interesting small data, in oncology. Companies like Glaxo, for example, spent $300 million, spent $15 million with 23andMe. They would have bought the company if they could for a few billion, but 23andMe is going to be bought for $10 billion plus. We'll see in a year or 2. And all they're doing is asking questions. I'll give you an example of the kind of question. And what I mean by the creation of data or the manufacturing of data is an example. Here's an example. There's a spot on your gene, on your genome, a SNP called 2D19, just a location. And depending on your allele, if you have that, you're going to be sensitive to Coumadin. No one knows that except 23andMe. Of course, they can't do anything about it. Nor would you necessarily want to read that or care about it. But shouldn't your pharmacist know? Shouldn't your physician know? Today, you're going to actually you're going to be given a blood thinner that ain't going to work too good, and that's why they'll then move you from the cheap Coumadin warfarin to the expensive, Lexapro, some other expensive one, after doing it empirically. That was going to test it on you. We can now today look at that record that I was referring to before and start populating the journey with manufactured data. An example would be, if you write this prescription for a drug for HCV costing $62,000, here's the probability that your patient will actually get covered. Okay? Here's the probability that your patient will actually stay compliant based on their past history and make this whole exercise worthwhile. Today, payers don't actually use this data that much, but soon they will, and they're now emerging with value-based contracting. So I just recently got off an exercise last week where we designed a program where Bayer Healthcare, with their new Victravin product, which is specific only to people with a specific gene mutation that cost $31,000, that they said with all the payers, they got 17 payers agreeing to pay that right away as soon as someone has that gene diagnosis with Foundation of Care or some genomic testing lab. But the deal is this: after 89 days, if they're not responding, we want the money back. And Bayer has signed a contract that says we'll pay you back if they're not working with you. In exchange, though, they're getting the information about the testing results much faster. Makes sense? And so patients win in that environment. And data plays a key role in the process.
So it's
Just
seemingly, yes.
Sorry, quick question on that. So there's the payer and then there's the pharmaceutical company in Bayer. Where's the provider in all this? We
So
talk
they're the
about
ones
all
that
these
actually sign-
contracts.
Yeah, they're the one that takes care of the patient, that is concerned about the patient's journey, is concerned that they've given them 5 different products that aren't working. They now think that maybe they should spend some money, about $1,000, to do a genetic test that will then hopefully elucidate this genetic marker. And in the event that it's only about 50% of the time that they're going to be right, oh my God, this person's got this disease, NTRK, that is the test. And now, of course, it's a pretty expensive process. So if they have good coverage, we'll tell them that. Whether they have good coverage, it's worth signing a little contract with the payer that says, I will put them on, payer will pay for this. We're not going to wait. By the way, typically for any product that's about more than $10,000, you're talking about 1 week to 30 days to get your coverage, your benefit verification, your prior authorization, possible step edits to take place. And so by circumventing all that and getting the patient on product quickly, they have a much higher chance of living longer.
When, as you know, with most of the high deductible plans these days, when you get your usual physical and submit your biometric test, you get the discounts in the premiums. Do you see things moving up to the genetic testing too?
Absolutely.
Right? That's happening. with the
Illumina,
payers.
I was speaking at JP Morgan meeting. I spent a bunch of time with the Illumina folks, the people that make the instruments that do the sequencing. They did 12 million Americans last year, and this year they're on schedule to do around 21, 22 million. How many more years do you have to go before most people's sequences are up in the cloud sequence? That'll make a big difference in precision medicine.
So just your thoughts on the concept where the ethics comes into play with the big data scenario, where the health insurance companies now are starting to say you're required to tell them if you've taken this genetic test, and they'll drop you from insurance because you've shown prevalence to disease state management scenarios. Is there some kind of intersection where data should be held in a certain form that it doesn't have an adverse effect with you now, so you know what could happen to you, and then there's repercussions to based on insurance and other parts of medical coverage?
You want to try that one? I'm glad to talk about it, because if I talk about it, it's going to be, I'll be invoking IBM, but you're the expert at it.
Despite being an AI scientist, I would rather take a measured view about collection of data. I think the world has gone crazy with collecting. I wanted to, yesterday I was filling out my registration for my son for swimming. He started asking me, how many children do you have? Oh, what is your annual income? I am just registering for. And also the company, it doesn't even have an optional thing. So I think as consumers, and that's why Amicus Brain, we are taking a particular stance in terms of preserving the privacy of the consumers, clients we serve. And we are, we want to be highly ethical with a particular heavy focus on data privacy and data protection. So I think the world has gone nuts, and instead of trust but comply, we have to distrust first in today's world, and and comply minimally as far as data requirements. I don't know whether you have done this. I keep talking. I get asked this a lot. So these challenge questions you all fill out. Your mother's first boyfriend in high school, and all that is available with all the breaches happening. It's in the dark web. So there's so much available for people to concoct, craft a more holistic view of what has happened in your life and my life and about our parents and so on. So I think it's high time consumers take the power in their hands and push back on data requests, and question the data requests that come at you, and push the governments to also legally push for very hard data regulation, data protection.
So Chitra, just kind of coming back to some of the themes which we talked about before, with personal health information and the issues. There was obviously ethical issues, and cybersecurity was talked about before. Is there some specific best practices? So having a compliance department was talked about, that you've come across where when a firm or a fund is looking to invest in this space, they should be looking for. Is it culture, or is it department? Is it what
It's a combination of many, I would say. Do they have? I think as the investors, you should be demanding that they have a data security and privacy officer in place. Any company which is collecting data, analyzing data, what is the technology they have, and what is their policy, and what are they compliant with, and so not just rest on, I'm a Google, I run on Google Cloud, and Google is a HIPAA compliant, so therefore I'm okay. But you're writing your application logic on top of that, so what is your policy? So the speaker before us during the break spoke about a number of things. I think a lot of consulting firms are now have started this new practice around the whole data privacy and protection, which is offering strategy and implementation, best practices, coaching and training about around data.
There's two main methods in dealing with privacy or compliance to HIPAA regulations in this country. One has to do with safe harbor, and if you're an analytical-minded person, it's quite useless. It emasculates the whole data set. And so expert determination is the other process where you carefully look at, and there are software companies that will assist in evaluating the probability. You don't have to be 100%, you just have to be high, like 99%, that the probability of re-identification is extremely low after all these data sets become aggregated and integrated. You only need 10 alleles, 10 little spots of your genome, and we can identify people right down to the person. And so you don't need a heck of a lot. You'd be surprised that there's this little thing on the internet that when I was showing by one of my, I lost it the other day, that you can go to, and you type in your zip code, right? You type in your zip code, and you put in your initials, and it spits back your address. Okay, and that's pretty surprising in terms of the implications.
So it kind of implies that there's a lot of innovation and small companies and large companies going on using data. Where are you seeing most of that innovation occur at this point? Is it the IBMs of the world, or are you seeing it in early stage? There was a question where, for the genomics, for example, to the investment bankers earlier, are you seeing deals in that space at this point? But it sounds like there isn't. What are you guys seeing in terms of the the innovation and the use of data, or is it the two guys from Wharton, or is it everywhere?
I think in I'll call it my world,
Yeah.
the innovation, the trend I'd say over the last 10 years is the large pharma, the large med device are leaving the innovation to the small companies, the startups, and they're going out on a limb, they're taking a concept, they're figuring out whether or not it has any legs. The large pharma, the large med tech are creating even investment arms where they go around looking for that little innovative piece that fits into their portfolio. I mentioned when we had a prep call for this that I was representing a company at a life sciences conference the other day, and as opposed to meeting 10 investment firms, 8 of the people I met with were investment arms of large pharma. And really they were just looking for that next great innovative idea that they could bring into their firm without having had to invent it from scratch. So I think a lot of innovation is happening at these very small startup firms, and then the large pharma or the large med device firms are acquiring them when it's actually a proven concept or it's made it through phase 1, phase 2, and it's ready for big time.
Excellent, excellent. And following on from that acquisition, so when either the big pharma or a private equity fund is acquiring, I'm going to kind of ask a similar question to what was asked in the earlier panel. How do you keep that founding entrepreneur and innovator motivated and engaged as you look to scale and grow that business? What tips, being on the kind of the other side of the table, would you say to potential investors?
Yeah, so generally, if it's a founder operator, your resources are limited. You have likely not untapped capital, so you're tapped by capital, you're tapped by resources, and you can only grow so much. So having a strategic partner that's scaled and grown models nationally or maybe within the geography that you want to go in is certainly helpful. And one positive way to keep the founder incented is if they have equity within the business that's being acquired, if you can illustrate a model where the growth is now going to be 3 times greater as if he was doing it himself, or twice as fast as if he was doing it himself. So certainly the growth component plays a vital role in keeping the founding members incentivized, along with maybe even having, earnouts. If you hit this marker, you get rewarded X number of dollars, or whatever the case is. So the economics play a role, along with certainly the ability to grow much quicker with the strategic partner that they partner with.
I think, and the investors in the room probably know this better than us as executives who have been the subject of acquisitions, but the best transactions I've seen executed are those where the timelines or the evaluation of what skill sets does that founder or that executive team, what skill sets do they really have? And are they of long-term value to this company once the acquisition and or merger is completed? And so really hit that head on at the time of the acquisition. And to your point, define that for that person. So we see it as a 3-year plan. We're going to need you for a 2 or 3 year time frame. These are your incentives to take us through that time frame. And they need to be appropriate. But we don't see you as a long-term asset to the company. So, because what I've seen is just founders hanging on, and in fact, as the company grows and or changes, it can be an incredibly disruptive force to that future of that company and the strategic direction that an investment firm and or investor or acquirer really saw for the company. And it could disrupt culture, it could really disrupt the future. So the acquisitions that are done with a really good evaluation of what strengths that person brings to the table, are they necessary to the future of the company, and lay out that path at the beginning. I think that's very, very well thought out transaction.
It's a very good point, because there are many founders that we've consulted with, and we've done M&A deals that just want to stick with their culture, stick with their employees, and they want to have nothing to do
Status quo,
with
all
the
the way.
evolutionary process. And it's best, to pick up on that as quickly as you can. Obviously, you can't be a mind reader. But if that person has an employment contract, to sort of not rock the ship for, immediately. But if that person has some sort of guaranteed exit where you can slowly implement the processes that you want to change, I personally found that that's worked quite well.
I think in technology in particular, whether it be software technology or innovative therapeutics, it's really a function of the maturity cycle of the technology and the assessment of the acquirer, the team, as to whether or not it's mature enough, and we don't need that founding team. So I think there's one example. Last night we were at an event with Michael Dolson, President of Pfizer, and his Chief Scientific Officer. And he likes buying companies and holding on to the team because they want to get us at a time where there's still a lot of potential for new innovation and new ideas. You can't just replace a couple of key scientists. The whole team can be lost. At times, Novartis recently picked up a company called Avexis, paid $8 billion on the strength of 8 patients. The records only had 8 patients, and the FDA approved them on 8 patients for spinal muscular atrophy, a disease of kids. That kids die by the age of 2, and the platform was ready to go. They didn't want more innovation around the platform, and so almost the entire company is gutted. The technology is then brought into the Novartis laboratories, and they start scaling, the process of scaling. The problem with innovators is that they're not good at scaling. All right, I'm pointing to myself. We have trouble with scaling because we want to keep on going to the next little shiny little part of this tool that we've built, and we're real proud of it. And at Novartis, now that they've got approval from the payers to charge $2.1 million per prescription, they're set for scaling.
Thank you. We've touched on
Can
just
I just add one point here? So my co-panelists talked about culture, skills, and so I would, add a word of caution. There's everyone throwing the words machine learning, AI, sort of pixie dust. So all of you will be enamored of that. I would suggest look under the hood and investigate the skills of the staff. How many people take Coursera for maybe 6 weeks, and everybody has become a data scientist. So just look for truly how many people are in the company you're looking at are truly trained as a proper in statistics and math and analytical techniques to truly call themselves data scientists. And secondly, there are really AI is overhyped, unfortunately. There are really very few companies in the world which have the kinds of data that you need to train really powerful machine learning models. So when you're looking at these small and middle tier organizations, entities, check what kind of data. What is the data dependency? Where are they getting the data? So that is an important point too. So as Harry said, if they are collecting the data and curating the data, and there is a path to grow, that's a very different value prop to they are dependent on some other entity providing the data, and their value is really building the model, which is very easily commoditized. So just
Hi, thanks for spending time here today. I'm Scott Cooley from NYC Partners. I haven't heard anyone mention anything about wearables today. We're talking about data and when the journey starts. I would probably push back, say it's not when you cross the threshold of primary care physician, it's probably when you throw on your first wearable, and that's then getting into some sort of going to some cloud, someone's collecting it, and it's probably going to some sort of insurance company, or at least I think that's where things are going. I guess so. My question. How is this going to impact payers, providers, consumers? Obviously, we're nobly putting these devices on today, but 5 million of us a year are throwing them on. But I don't know if that's going to continue given where the data is going to go.
It's an area that's totally exploding. Our family office has recently provided a significant gift to Westchester University to start a new biomedical engineering department with a very strong focus on wearables. when I speak once a year to Drexel University's Biomedical Engineering Master's Program, I talk about almost exclusively about wearables, the generation of data to add to that journey that I talked about. Okay, I'll give you a quick example. It's been about 3 years now that we've been doing this, but we were approached by one of our longstanding customers, Suka, a family-based company that is eclectic and owns vineyards in California, nature-made supplements on shelves in pharmacies, and a whole series of other high-priced pharmaceuticals like Abilify for schizophrenia and bipolar disease. They went off patent. Their $8 billion franchise drops to less than $1 billion, and they scratch their head as to what to do about it. I'm not too bright. My knee-jerk reaction: turn it into a specialty. That's all I know. So let's go. And they said, how would we turn it into a specialty product? And the answer was a wearable. In this case, an ingestible. And so a small company in California called Proteus, small company with a very high valuation, by the way, makes a small little chip that, while it doesn't have a computer screen or a battery, those are the things that make things big, it does everything else, ciphers, computes, communicates. And they put that into the Abilify pill. And what happens is that the patient takes the pill, or doesn't take the pill, that's the key thing. But when they take the pill, the acid in the stomach generates enough electricity to provide the juice needed to start communicating. It communicates to a patch, which comes in the prescription. This communicates then to a phone when it's on, and that phone then goes to our offices in King of Prussia, where we aggregate it with all the other specialty pharmacy data, connected to EMR records, connected to claims records, and when we have 23andMe and consent added to that, to try to provide ways of predicting, and then developing the cutting edge today would be the playbook. What's the playbook? So now you know Johnny didn't take the damn pill at noon. What do you do now? Turns out that fantasy football points sometimes helps. Because Johnny doesn't take the pill. The problem with schizophrenia, okay, and bipolar is that they're often, not always, but they're mostly male, 85%, often unemployed, often on some kind of public assistance, and if they don't take the pill, they're going to be in some jail or hospital, and we're all paying for it through our taxes. And so the franchise is now building back up because of a much smaller distribution, much smaller patient population, but a more substantial value proposition. In fact, the family, the business, they've decided is that we're no longer in the pill business. We're in the solution business. We're solving public assistance, financial planning programs for the schizophrenic population. And absolutely, well, we can expect Internet of Things and wearables to be very, very substantial players in this space. Already, FDA has provided FDA approval on 2 products. There's no pill. It's an app on a phone for behavioral health. And I think we're also in clinical research. We have small little companies now that are emerging that use the iPhone as the key device instead of having case report forms to collect the data. And for Parkinson's, it's amazing because you can tell whether someone is having, events, and you can also listen to them speak. And that, instead of becoming periodic assessment, like once a month assessment going into a doctor's office, you get 50 to 200 assessments a day. Okay, and clinical trials become much more robust in that fashion.
So that was one of my kind of final questions. Was we talked a lot about data, but there's lots of other innovations going on in healthcare, Internet of Things, genomics. We touched on a little bit. Is there anything else as we maybe wrap up and get people to the drinks that is worth talking about a few moments when it comes to some of the innovations going on, which are going to move the needle in healthcare?
I believe that immunotherapy work is obviously life-changing for patients, specifically in the cancer space. The advances that have been made in both blood cancers and now solid tumor therapies that are coming to market. I was saying earlier today, I don't know where she went, but when we were kids, if someone was diagnosed with cancer, it was kind of not sure. There's not much you can do, and no knock on the chemotherapy treatments, et cetera, that are out there today. But the immunotherapy advances that have been made, people's lives are going to be saved, and it's literally through your own cells, which are being mutated and injected back into your body to kill your own cancers. And I think it's phenomenal. It's amazing. I'm not a scientist or an engineer by trade, and just to watch the advancements has been phenomenal. So to me, that's a trend that is amazing.
I would say blockchain is something to be looking out for. So it's at least several hundreds of pilots are underway in the financial services. Still, what is going to be the killer app of the use of blockchain in healthcare? I think that's still up in the air, but it's definitely, especially as more and more remote monitoring of data by the instrumentation with the IoT, there will be a real worry about the data integrity coming from edge, and therefore there is a role for, I would imagine there is a role for blockchain to ascertain the provenance and the integrity of data, so that any insights coming out of that is not being adversarially manipulated. So something again as an emerging technology to watch for.
I was going to quickly comment on something where data becomes prescriptive, and from an investor perspective, extremely important. Because prescription, what I mean, it's not from the free perspective, but from your dollar investment perspective, prescriptive in a sense. Because immunotherapy, while amazing, is only good for about 35% of the population. Knowing in advance which 2/3 is, are you in the 2/3 where it's not going to work, or a third where it's going to work? My daughter, I have 26, she's 28 today.
Depends on the therapy.
Pardon me?
Depends on the therapy.
Correct. My daughter was diagnosed. She went in for hernia. She comes up with a stage 4 ovarian cancer diagnosis. Her genetics were done immediately, insisted on it, and it became clear that she was platinum and Taxol resistant. So we know in advance the therapy, first-line therapy, will not be working. That's kind of useful to know, because it means now that the whole play, it's like, picking your quarterback kind of thing. The surgeon was like, yeah, so we moved her immediately from Mason in Philadelphia to MSK here, Kettering, and she's 28, doing fine for the moment. Staying in the wrong place and not having that information becomes a big, makes a big difference.
Glad she's well.
Yeah.
Harris, any final comments in terms of what you're seeing from innovation in the healthcare as things progress? For example, I saw that there's Uber Health being leveraged by your company.
Yeah, so we're starting to see a lot of big tech playing a vital role in the PPM model, the physician practice management model. We partnered with Uber Health about a year ago. It's a HIPAA compliant platform designed by Uber, where they utilize their existing drivers for the purposes of transporting patients to us. So again, us being focused on really capturing the patients and treating them before they use Uber, our goal is to create attractive services and models that engage them from day one, then obviously retain them for the duration of the services that we're offering them. So Uber has certainly been great in coming out with that platform. We know that several other physician-owned practices have been utilizing it within the area, and I wouldn't be surprised if it started being implemented nationally. The other thing that I just quickly want to touch on in terms of just data is the ubiquity of EMR systems in almost any practice, and almost the necessity of it today, has really made the exchange of data between other specialties and other doctors and other providers a total breeze compared to what it used to be. EMRs are totally HIPAA compliant. There's no breach of data, that happens internally when the information is exchanged, and it gives consumers and it gives patients access to healthcare almost instantaneously, while making the physician and the providers as a whole much more efficient as well.
Thank you. Any questions before we wrap up? Get to the drinks. No? Okay. Thank you all.